Okay, welcome everybody. I'm so thrilled to welcome Paula Hawkins today, and I'll just do a short bio in case there's anybody in the world that doesn't know who you are, Paula. Paula Hawkins worked as a journalist for 15 years before writing her first novel. Born and brought up in Zimbabwe, she moved to London in 1989. Her first thriller, The Girl on the Train, became a global phenomenon, selling over 23 million copies. Published in over 50 languages. It was a #1 bestseller around the world and a box office hit film starring Emily Blunt. Paula's most recent thrillers, Into the Water, A Slow Fire, Burning, were also instant #1 bestsellers. In 2021, A Slow Fire Burning was nominated for the Thriller of the Year at the British Book Awards. Her most recent thriller, The Blue Hour, was published around the world in October 2024 and the Gloss Official Book Club choice for November 2025. So, welcome and thank you so much for joining us. We're so thrilled you were able to make it.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Now, if anybody has a question that they would like to ask live, then you're absolutely welcome to raise your hand. Or if you want to use the chat functionality, then I can be sure that the question does get asked. The chat functionality is just at the bottom with the little bubble window. I will pop a. This should bring it up on everybody's screen. Otherwise, I have so many questions that were emailed in, so I'm going to work my way through those. And here is Rita, who I'm going to ask if she'll be my co-host. But first off, I was hoping, Paula, if you could tell us a little bit more about your journey, really. We know you were a journalist, but what did it look like? Because your first book was just such a success, and I mean that's very, very unusual for a debut novelist. So I'd love to hear sort of that experience in your words.
Well, the first thing I should say is that I wasn't actually a debut novelist. It was my first thriller, but I
Ah,
had I had written four novels under a different name. I wrote four novels under a pseudonym, um, that were not so successful. I mean, a couple of them were kind of okay, but none of them took off. They were in a different genre. They were kind of romantic comedy, and I do that with big air quotes because it wasn't the right fit for me, romantic comedy. I'm not romantic or funny, so it wasn't like the best fit to go. So I wrote those four books. I had a little bit of success. I had quite a lot of failure. People think it's an overnight success. It's not that at all. I was working my way towards finding, the right voice for me, the right genre that I should be writing in. I think I should have probably realized earlier on that it was thrillers that would have been right for me, but it just took me a moment to get there.
that makes a ton of sense, actually. And I'm sorry I didn't know that about you. I'm sure if I had dug
No,
a
it's
little bit
fine.
deeper, I would have figured that out. So, I wonder with the girl on the train exploding the way it did the follow-up to that, did that feel daunting? And if so, in what ways?
Yeah, it really did because the thing about writing, I mean, I've just said The Girl on the Train wasn't my debut, but in a way it felt like a debut because nobody knew who I was. There's this kind of freedom in writing from anonymity like that. There's no expectation really. And obviously, having had a very big success, there is suddenly a ton of expectation on you, um, and you know that there's people. There are literally millions of people who are waiting to see what you'll do next, and you know that the press will pay attention to what you do next. So there were all these outside pressures, but also for myself, I
Mm.
was I wanted to make sure that I didn't stumble, that the second book was good, was good. And at the same time, I was touring, or I toured almost constantly for about a year and a half. There was a movie coming out, there was all this crazy, like great stuff going on. But for me, that is not the perfect writing environment. I like to be sitting quietly at home with no distractions and no noise and no, that's my process. So it was it was tricky for lots of reasons, mostly good reasons, but it was difficult.
Yeah, that's so fascinating to hear, to be honest. So, what was the journey like to when you finally figured out like, okay, this is like psychological thriller is my niche and like did you just feel that like in when you sat down and started to write that first draft of Girl on the Train or like what even like prompted you to write that first to
I think
change
I'd
genres and
always,
write that?
I mean, I think I'd the sort of romantic comedies I mentioned had come about in a bit of a strange way, in that my agent had approached me and said, "Oh, there's this publisher, they want someone to write something." I was sort of almost given a commission to write it, so it didn't feel like it
Yeah,
came from me.
okay.
It wasn't my idea. I read more in the sort of thrillerish space, not exclusively, but I tend to read darker books. So I always felt slightly uneasy in the romantic comedy space. So I sort of knew what direction I should be going in. It took me a long while to actually get to it, but the moment I started, the moment I had the idea of this woman who drinks too much, who can't remember what she's done last night, who is in this very bad place, and who's something very bad I knew was going to happen to her. It felt right. I knew that I could hear her voice. I could see where she was going. I could see how the story would open up once I'd put her on the train, once I'd had this idea that she was going to see something that was very significant to her. I could see it opening up, but more than anything, I could really hear Rachel's voice, and I knew that it just felt right.
All right. Just remind everybody if you have any questions, you're for Paula, you're welcome to ask them in the chat window, or you can ask them live by raising your hand, and I'll make sure that we get them asked. So I just wanted to share a quick reader moment with you. I don't love Girl on the Train, which is frankly fine because about 23 million other people did. So, but I had to confess, it wasn't quite the book for me. So I was actually reluctant to read The Blue Hour, and it's a big but because I absolutely loved it. And I would love to discuss like just how it felt very different to me than Girl on the Train. And I mean,
Yeah.
maybe, but it all felt so rich and beautifully handled. And it's just one of those books that really stays with you.
I think it's been a long journey for me. I mean, there are themes people who've read all my books will recognize. There are things that I seem to kind of return to around women's lives, around the unreliability of memory or whatever. But I think there is quite a long journey between The Girl on the Train and The Blue Hour. So I'm not surprised that I'm glad that you found it richer, and that it was a story that remained with you, because I think that is what I would really like to be writing, are the kind of books that people almost want to return to and look at again and think about some more. So not just a quick kind of airport read, if you know what I mean.
No, I loved it. I was so happy. I was like, this is amazing. And I'll be recommending it
Thing.
highly. I mean, other than to the 150 chapters around the world of the clause. So okay, let's move to The Blue Hour, since that is the book that everybody read and that is the book we're talking about. Um, my first question that actually got emailed in was Iris feels like a character in its own right, which I could not agree more. What drew you to a tidal-locked island, and how did that isolation shape the story's tension? That was such a great like thing. I loved that so much.
I loved it too. I was on holiday in France like quite a few years ago now. I think it was about 2018, and in Brittany, and I was doing some walking on the coast there, and there are lots of these little islands, these sort of tidal islands, so places you can access when the tide is out, but that are cut off. And there was one, I remember walking on the beach and seeing one that had a single house on it, and I was just like, oh, that is so. It was perfect. It was beautiful, and it was. I just thought it was such a great location for a novel, particularly a crime novel, because you can be trapped in this place. You could need to get to it and not be able to. I could see all these possibilities straight away. So I really loved that location. When I came to actually writing it, I decided I didn't want it to be in France. I wanted it to be, push it up further north to where it's dark and stormy and, Scottish. But it was a gift of a location, because not only did it it sort of shaped the characters, because one of the things I had to think about is what kind of person was going to choose to go and live in a house
Mm.
where they're cut off twice a day, every day. What would make you want to go there? And so, an artist maybe, someone who's drawn by the landscape, but also by the promise of solitude and who wants to get away from something. And then I'm thinking, okay, what's she getting away from? So there were all these ways in which the location shaped the characters, it shaped the plots. Um, and there was this thing about the rhythm of the tide going in and out and in and out. And that's such a useful thing to have when you're writing a novel, some sort of other framework that can kind of just put some restrictions on you and you have to work within those restrictions. Sometimes that's really helpful when you're trying to think about moving into the book. And it also adds to this kind of feeling of tension, doesn't it? Because you always know that the tide may be coming in and, things have to happen immediately. So it was a real gift, that location.
So before you had your characters, did you have the location then?
I had the island. I tried between, where did I start writing it? Because I had another idea with the island. I started writing the island. It was before A Slow Fire Burning, in fact. I had this other idea. I couldn't make it work. It was too bleak. It was awful. I threw it away. But I knew that I wasn't that the island was going to stay, was going to remain. I would do something with it one day. So it was the first thing I had, and I just had to find the right person to live on it and the right kind of story to tell with it.
It's the way that authors work is so fascinating. Everybody has a little bit of a different take on it all, so I love to hear
Hmm.
yours. Art in the Blue Hour can reveal or obscure the truth. How did you think about art confession versus camouflage for your characters? Sorry, how did you think about art as confession versus camouflage?
Well, I mean, I guess it's an interesting thing because obviously art is always it's an expression of something, and it can be an expression of anything. One of the interesting things is what the artist is expressing might not necessarily be what the viewer takes from it. So there's all these things you can play with, where and something that an artist projects might to them feel like camouflage, but actually to the viewer look like confession. And that's you can always play with those two different things. And so there is a moment, for example, when Grace looks at something that Vanessa's painted, and what the painting is called Love, and she reads all these things into it, and she sees this is not just an expression of their about their friendship; it's about her forgiveness. And then you think, well, is that really what Vanessa meant? That maybe she didn't mean that at all. So I think that's the really fun thing to do with all kinds of artistic expression, that there's obviously what the artist intended, if they intended anything consciously, because sometimes they're just, it's coming out of you in a kind of more subconscious way. And then there's what everybody else takes from it and their interpretation. And so much of this book is about how we who gets to tell the story about somebody, who gets to say what this means, who gets to say what Vanessa's art is about, really. Um, and so that's again, it's a really interesting thing for a novelist to play with, because there's all these points of contradiction and conflict, and all these places where maybe the reader just has to decide whether that's confession or camouflage. Are they hiding something, or are they telling you something?
One thing that stood out with me with the art was that her last piece was when she was relatively sick.
Mm,
And I think it was a painting because that's all she could do.
yeah.
But that like made me think of like because she'd already such an established author, such an established artist at that time, but she was like that was probably still worth money because once like even if it wasn't the best version of the work she did. So I was like I went off on a tangent on that.
Yeah, but I mean that's part of it, isn't it? That's why I think was one of the reasons that I was drawn to the art world as a sort of a vehicle for a crime novel, because there's all these different ways in which conflict can build up over the legacy of someone, who owns what, who has the right to which piece, who says what it's worth. So there's loads of stuff around that. I think that's interesting.
Rita has a question here, and she says, spoiler alert question. So if anybody hasn't read the end, then you might want to not listen to this. She says, my understanding of the ending is that Becker dies. However, reading a question posted on Goodreads, someone suggested the blue light was a cop car or an ambulance and Becker is rescued. Can you clarify, or is the ending ambiguous?
It's ambiguous. I mean, I think there is obviously the blue light. He sees a blue light. Whether does he really see a blue light? Is he imagining that he sees something? But there's a point right at the beginning where he thinks he sees something, a blue light. And I wanted you to be circling back a little bit, um, not knowing. So yes, it's deliberately ambiguous. I think lots of people believe he's going to be saved, and lots of people believe no, sorry, he's gone. And I thought long and hard about that ending, but in the end, I did want to leave a little bit of space. I quite like that. Some people don't, but I like a bit of space for interpretation and for you to fill in your own gaps. As far as I'm concerned, if I haven't written it on the page, then all possibilities still exist.
Isn't it funny that as a reader, when we get to that end and we're like, but hold on, there's no ending. But like it's like we can't like go and say, okay, and he lived. Like we can't just say that to ourselves and like that be the ending. It's like if the author hasn't written it, then it's not the true ending. We're not allowed to just choose our ending. It's not a choose your own
Yeah.
adventure.
I mean, the thing is, it's all the ending of a story is kind of arbitrary anyway, because something has to happen after that if we're to believe in these characters. But yeah, I know that I knew that that wouldn't necessarily sit well with everyone, but it's how I felt the book should end. So that's what you've got.
I actually liked the ending. I felt like it
Good.
was, I like endings like that. I feel like it's more realistic and then it just makes me like the book even more. So,
Okay, great.
Grace chooses solitude. Others impose it on her. What interests you about the difference between chosen isolation and enforced exile?
Well, I've been thinking when I first started writing this book, we were coming out of pandemic times. There had been a lot I'd been thinking a lot about being alone. There were lots of people, obviously, who were very lonely during the pandemic. We were all, to some degree, confined in one way and another. So I had been thinking about that myself. I found myself actually craving escape, craving getting away from people. I think partly it was kind of like wanting to get away from social media. So I should have just turned off my phone, but whatever. It was that I had this feeling of wanting to be separated. But then when you think about it, you know, I know that it's something that I probably wouldn't want to go through for very long. So it's a craving that you would probably reject after too long. But in any case, thinking about all the different ways in which people value their solitude and from a creative standpoint, what that gives to you, and then also the flip side of that, what loneliness looks like, what actual loneliness, how loneliness might change you, how it changes how you deal with the world, how being cut off from people in general changes how you deal with the world, how you relate to people, how you respond to them. So it was just something that I'd really been considering a lot, and all the things that might attract us to a lonely life, and then what the reality of that lonely life might actually do to a person over a really long period of time.
Thank you. Joanne has a question, but I'm going to wait on that one because I do have another one here about the actual book. Your work often plays with memory and moral ambiguity. Whose version of events did you want readers to trust here, if anyone, and why?
Well, I'm very much of the view that the reader can trust who the reader wants to trust. There is an obvious person in this novel that you follow around, and that is Becker. He sort of stands in. James Becker sort of stands in as like a detective figure, doesn't he? He's the one who's like taking you by the hand and taking you to the island, and I think he is. I think we see him as generally trustworthy. He's not always honorable, though. So I think it's always interesting to give the reader some doubts about him, because he doesn't always behave well. He does, and he has some dishonorable thoughts sometimes, some unworthy thoughts. But I do very much want to leave that completely up to the reader to decide who they believe, who they think Vanessa really was, for example. They've got her diaries, they've got what other people say about her, and then it's up to the reader to go with their own instincts about who they believe and who they trust in the story.
And this like relationship brewing, like I thought it was really interesting for her, for Becker's wife, and I forget her name now, but um,
Helena.
Elena, for her to have this past relationship with his, like that just added like a whole, a whole, yeah, I'll let you take it away.
Well, there's a lot of triangles in this book, and that's one of the many triangles. And I liked that idea of there being all these kind of complicated relationships and these people who were trying to sort of move past something. That they obviously it's a disaster, and they should all just he obviously he and Helena should leave, but he's so wedded to his work and he wants to stay there, and so they're trying to be like really civilized about it, but it's obviously it's not a good situation. But I was quite interested in how people try and do those things and try and make good and believe that they can be better and they can rise above all these things, but clearly he can't. Clearly he's checking his phone and he's jealous, and I wanted that to be sort of one of his, it's one of his weaknesses because he can't trust her properly, and that's, I think that says something about him as much as it does about her.
Well, in the beginning, I was like, wow, yeah, these people are doing this, and that seems odd. But then when it all came out that they weren't really doing it very well, then that
Yeah.
made a lot more sense. Rita has a question here. She says, Vanessa's will, leaving her estate to her nemesis, the Fairburn Foundation, was this decision intended to be a final, complex act of betrayal or revenge from beyond the grave?
Actually, I saw it as her believing that despite all everything that went on with her and the Fairburns, that would be the best. They would be the best people. That Douglas, so it's Douglas, isn't it? God, I'm forgetting
Yeah,
my own
yeah,
characters'
it's
names now.
Douglas.
Who was her dealer, who did you know, believe in her work and really, championed her work early on, that he would actually still be the best person. And there's also a kind of apology in there to him because she knows that she let him down terribly. Okay, he behaved badly, but she did let him down terribly, and she never explained to him why she had suddenly just pulled out of this exhibition that he had laid on for her. So there's a kind of an apology, but I think more to it. I think as an artist, she would believe that is where he will look after my work. He will protect my work. He would be the best person to look after, even if she doesn't love him or, care for him anymore, even if it's a gift to him. I think she would. That's how I saw it. That she would put the work above anything else and the legacy.
I don't know about other readers, but when I was reading it, I was like, there must be a mistake. How did he get this in her will? Like for the first like half of it, that's what you believe. I'm like, why didn't Grace get anything? Let's change gears a little bit. I'm just talking about your work in general. It often explores the interior lives of complicated, flawed women. What draws you to those psychological landscapes again and again?
I mean, I'm always drawn to people who are a little bit on the out. I mean, I tend to write women. I don't know. I just do. Women's lives interest me, and I'm always interested in women who are a little bit on the outside, who don't really fit, who, for one reason or another, are not doing what society expects of them, either because they've consciously rejected societal expectations or because they somehow are failing to meet up to the standards, to sort of live up to the standards that have been set for them. And I just find that those characters offer so much rich possibility in terms of conflict, in terms of storylines, and in terms of, I can imagine myself into those lives, I think. So that's one of the things I tend to return to again and then. It's these people, they're not always women. Becca's also a bit of an outsider, but it does tend to be women who are having a tricky time. I mean, these are crime novels after all. We can't have everyone being happy and well adjusted. So they need to be in some sort of difficulty or confronting some sort of difficulty. But yeah, I'm always interested in people who are a bit on the fringes for one reason or another, whatever that reason might be.
And speaking of crime novels, and I mean, it's not as gritty or gory like there's some authors who I'll interview and I'm just like, I don't like, where do you get this stuff from? And I don't think we go quite that dark, but Do you feel there's a part of yourself that's naturally gravitates towards the darker corners of human behavior?
Oh, absolutely. And I can't really explain why that is. It's not like I've had a terrible life or anything. But those are the stories when I open the newspaper, well, or look on the internet or what have you, it's always those quite dark stories that draw my attention. And particularly stories of apparently ordinary people whose lives have gone wrong in some way. So I'm not so much, obviously, I'm not writing about serial killers or gangsters or anything like that. These are all people who might be your neighbor or who might be people you know, who might be, yeah, someone in your family. And for some reason, something has gone disastrously wrong, or they've got themselves into a terrible situation. And those are the things that I'm always like, oh God, how did that happen? They were just like me. They were just this ordinary person. And those are the ones I really want to dig into. Where did it happen? Maybe it's some sort of like making sure it never happens to me, but digging into how a so-called ordinary person's life might go off the rails.
Rita has a question here, and I thought Marguerite was such a great character, because, especially with what was happening to her in the end with her memory. But Rita says here, Marguerite is involved in an abusive relationship with her late husband, which is used as an
Mhm.
example of power disparity in the novel. Is Marguerite's experience meant to serve as a mirror or a contrast to the less overt violence, but still destructive power dynamic at play between Grace and Vanessa?
Yeah, I think she was one of those characters who you have and you know that they're going to be important, and when you start writing the book you're not exactly sure how they're going to be important, but I always find that I like to have a character who's kind of watching the action, and in Marguerite's case it's sort of almost literal. Her house faces out towards the sea, towards the island, and she is there. She's watching, but at the same time, she's easily dismissed because she's old, she's confused, she's foreign, she's all these things. So people don't listen to what she's doing. Um, but then, yes, as you say, she's this incredibly isolated person. But one of the things I think I was doing with the abusive relationship was that there's this thing that she's kind of always watching for her husband to come back.
Mm.
Earlier on, literally, she is watching for him because he's never tells her when he's coming back. And then later, when she's struggling with her memory loss and the onset of dementia, she's still watching, even though he's not going to come back. So I think it was partly my sort of creation of that character as a watcher. Why is she so watchful? What is it that she's looking out for all the time? She's constantly waiting for this person to come back, and that's why she is the way she is. If that's
Okay. Um, I would like to explore a little bit about your evolution as a writer. From the early years, your early career as a journalist to where you are now, do you think your approach to storytelling has changed?
I'm
Oh,
I'm one of those people.
I
Sorry.
couldn't hear you. I can hear you now.
Um, I I'm sure it has. I always feel like every book is very different and is kind of its own brings its own sort of unique set of problems. So I mean, I think there is, as I said sort of briefly earlier, there are things that recur, but I don't see it quite so much in terms of a clear progression of moving from one thing to the other. I think I'll have an idea and it may come from a character or like in this instance from that location, that setting. And then I will start building the story around that thing. I'll bring in different elements and start building slowly. Um, but yes, I'm very much of the idea that they all have their own unique set of problems, and they don't one thing, one set of solutions will not apply to all of them, which is annoying because it would be nice if you just learned things and it all got better. I think though from journalism there are certain things that I took because I mean I did financial journalism. It had nothing to do with what I'm doing now, but there are things that you learn when you're a journalist about stripping out what's unnecessary in a story, getting to the heart of it, really focusing on what is it that is the hook here. And you do a lot of interviewing people and listening, listening to how they talk. And I think what you're always doing as a journalist is listening to what they're not telling you.
Mm.
What are they leaving out? And that's really helpful, particularly from like a crime novelist point of view. Is what are they trying to hide from me? When they said that, what were they kind of trying to avoid? So I think there's lots of things that you learn as a journalist that are then applicable to fiction writing.
And going on from that question, I wonder if there's anything that your younger self would be surprised about. Is there anything about the way you write today that your younger self would be like surprised that it's true or
I mean, I think my younger self would be pretty gobsmacked that that I was doing this at all. I never, I didn't when I was in my 20s, I never thought I would be a novelist. It didn't. I mean, I think I might have had like vague daydreams, but it wasn't like, oh yes, I can do this. I didn't know any novelists. I mean, not personally. I didn't know how that really happened to you. So it was a long time coming to me. So, um, but I think I wouldn't have been surprised that I ended up writing these kind of books, though. That definitely, I would have said, yeah, if she's going to write anything, it's going to be quite dark.
okay. Um, when you sit down to write, we talked a little bit about this, about how Girl on the Train came out, and all of a sudden you found yourself in this frenzy, this media frenzy, and you were probably writing your next book, but you didn't have the like that sort of perfect experience writing the next book. And so when you sit down to write, what does a productive day look like for you, and what does a terrible writing day look like?
Mean, again, it really varies, but because I think there's always a period. I love the beginnings of books when anything is possible, anything might happen, and you've got all of your exciting ideas, and you're quite sure that this one is going to be wonderful. Um, and then there's always a really, really terrible bit in the middle where everything is just can't see a way out. But in between those things, there are days where you sit down at your desk and everything just goes well, and you remember why you're excited about this, and you write a few sentences that you're really pleased with, and it's really fantastic. I think the worst days are really, it's not so much that you don't write a lot of words, it's that you lose faith in some aspect of this. You start to wonder, is this actually not going to work at all? Have I written myself into a corner that I can't come out of? And then you start thinking, oh God, is the whole thing going to fall down around me? Um, but that very rarely happens. I mean, usually you can get yourself out of anything, but there are. I always say there's usually a point in the middle of a novel where I sit at my desk and cry because I can't figure out what to do, and I've wasted months. I'm convinced that I've wasted months and what have you, but that it's not usually the case.
So,
A good day. Sorry.
no, I was just going to say you keep going with this, and I'll ask my question after.
No, I was going to say a good day is when you just don't want to stop going. You're like really having fun and enjoying yourself.
So, by the sounds of things, this means you are a pantser.
Mostly, I mean, not 100%. I
Okay.
don't have like no idea where it's
Right.
going. I usually have I kind of know well, I know who done it, maybe. I've sort of got this vague point that I'm aiming for. But then everything else that happens in between, I don't want to really plan out too much because that takes some of the joy and the spontaneity out of it for me. So there is usually a point right in the middle where I'm like, okay, I need to, put some post-its on a board so I can see where everything is. Because it's quite nice to have a visual sense of it. But I can't do that at the beginning because I don't know what it's going to look like.
But I think that this genre must be the most difficult to write this way. And like we talked to other like and your colleagues in the industry, I mean, some of them have everything completely.
Yeah. Some people do. And then there's people like Lisa Jewell and Lee Child who have no idea. They just sit down and write. And they always astound me, those two, because they write a lot and they write really good books. They're like satisfying mysteries. And you're like, how did you not even know
Yeah,
what
yeah,
this was?
yeah.
They swear they just sit down and go. So
Okay.
it is difficult. Yeah, that's why I want to know that I have this like point. That's what I'm aiming for. So I just got to try and get from here to that.
Okay. And what has been the most unexpected, challenging part of being a novelist, if you had to choose just one?
Um, I mean, I like talking to bookish people like this, but I think the public facing part of it
Yeah.
is the least comfortable for me. Not to be mean to journalists, I was a journalist myself, but I don't really enjoy speaking to the press that much about books. I thought, yeah, that's the hardest, that's the most draining part of it for me is trying to is speaking to journalists about it.
You're
That sounds really mean.
absolutely not alone. I've spoken to so many authors who have said the exact same thing. They're like, we chose a
Hmm,
profession where we get to do it by ourselves. And then the publishers are like, now go to the world and speak to everyone.
yeah, absolutely.
Rita has a question here. She goes, is there a certain scene that you struggled with the most or rewrote the most from The Blue Hour?
I mean, as I said, I did struggle with the ending. There were various iterations of the ending. Um, I'm trying to think. I can't think of another scene that was especially difficult. I think Grace was trickier as a character because she doesn't really know herself a lot of the time. So she was more difficult to get under the skin of and to sort of get to her voice. But in terms of scenes, I think probably the ending was rewritten and maybe actually the beginnings as well, because I think the thing about what I found tricky about at the beginning of this book was I wasn't exactly sure where to begin it. So, should I begin it here? Should I begin it here? A big part of storytelling is actually deciding where do I start this?
Mm,
What is the point at which I need to start telling the story? So that was probably, beginnings and endings.
amazing. I want to just go back to the girl on the train again, and I'm sorry, you probably must get so many questions about that. But the question is, with the way it exploded, um, what was the most surreal moment for you during that whirlwind of global attention? Was there like one period where you're like, could this get any bigger?
It was, yeah, it's funny because it's a long time ago now. It's 10 years ago, or slightly more. And there wasn't, I don't think there was ever one big moment. It was like an accumulation of moments that it was like, oh, I just kept thinking, this is insane. This is
Yeah.
insane. Um, and so, I mean, when it became so big in the US, that was a shock because I didn't expect that at all. I didn't expect it to be huge in the UK either, but I particularly did not expect it to be so big in the US so quickly. And then, you get attention from, in those days, I used to be on social media, I was on Twitter, and, Stephen King tweeted about it. And in those days, I didn't know that Stephen King is in fact incredibly generous and tweets about lots of people. But I was like, oh my God. And Reese Witherspoon did. And it's very odd to think of your book being in the hands of a bona fide famous person. So all of those small moments. Yeah, I mean, there was, and then all the movie stuff as well. Obviously, the movie angle sort of took everything to a slightly different level, because that was still in the days where you had a big premiere in at the cinemas and stuff. It wasn't just going streaming, so it felt like more of a big deal out in the world there.
And can you talk about that experience? And also, for my own interest, I was so annoyed when it was set in America. Can you talk about that experience of it going from book to the silver screen?
I mean, I didn't really have anything to do with it.
For sure.
That's the first thing I can tell you is that I sold the rights before the book was even published. It was sold very quickly. I was quite happy to let somebody else do what they want with it because I don't know anything about making movies. So I did all the nice, fun stuff. I went to the set, I met the actors, I went to the premiere. I had all the fun things and none of the work. Um, a lot of people were really annoyed that it was set in the US. I honestly didn't think that much about it at the time, but I remember my agent saying, "This is people are not going to be happy." I was like, but yeah, I mean, I actually think there are lots of things about that movie that I do really like, most notably Emily Blunt's performance. But you know what? It's just somebody else's interpretation. So you've just got to, I think you've got to be quite kind of sanguine about the stuff if you're the author, unless you want to actually, direct or show run yourself. You've got to just say, okay, guys, just do what you want and we'll see.
I feel like that's a very generous perspective. I know other authors who are like, they did this wrong, they did that wrong, they didn't stay true to the
I
book.
mean, they didn't do. Obviously, if I directed it, would have been a different. But if I wanted that, then I should have directed it myself. So I
Agreed.
think you can. I think if you want complete ownership over something, then take that ownership. It's not an easy thing to translate 300 pages into 90 minutes or whatever. It really isn't. So I think I think it's quite hard also to love any adaptation of something that you've liked on the page because you just keep seeing the differences all the time, and the person that you saw in your head is not the person on screen.
I will go back to Joanne's question. She was asking about the Blue Hour being made into a movie or Netflix series.
Not so far. I mean, I would love to see it. So if any of you happen to know any producers out there who would like the rights, they are available. But yeah, nothing so far.
Okay. And just a couple more questions. We have a few more minutes. If anybody else has a question they'd like to ask, please put it in the chat. On reading yourself, are there any authors you turn to when you need to be reminded of why you love storytelling, or what kind of books instantly pull you in as a reader?
Yeah, I mean, there are people that I go back to again and again. I always talk about her. Kate Atkinson is one of my favorites. So she's a British, she writes history fiction and sort of a crime series, the Jackson Brady series. I love her. I love Pat Barker, who writes a lot of war books, which I find very compelling for some reason. Lately, I've been reading a lot of nonfiction. I'm just looking behind me. I've been reading a lot of essays and things like that. I dip in and out of all sorts, but I tend to be on the sort of darker side of things. There are people like Tana French, I really like.
Yeah.
Megan Abbott, who's a US writer who I love. Laura Lippman. I quite like that noirish sort of sensibility that I'm always pulled in by a bit of noir. So Dennis Lehane, I really like. I don't read that much crime all the time because if I'm writing, I kind of don't want other people's plots in my head. But those are the sorts of people that I would return to. Yeah.
And looking ahead, is there a type of story you haven't told yet but would love to explore?
I mean, I don't have designs to go to a completely different genre, but I think I'm vaguely thinking about something. When I say historical, I don't mean like 17th century, but something maybe 20 or even 40, 50 years ago. It would have the great advantage of not having to worry about mobile phones and CCTV, which would be so nice. Um, but I haven't done it yet, but it's something that I have thought about, something slightly set in a little way back. I do also love to, as to switch between different time frames. So that kind of how the past informs the present it always comes up with me, and I do love that.
And do you have anything coming out? Any books to look forward to that will be published soon?
Well, not soon, but I'm writing. I'm near. I was going to say I'm nearly finished, and then I never want to say I'm nearly finished because then that feels like jinxing it. But I'm hoping that I'm nearly finished. So whether it would be the end of next year or probably more likely the beginning of the following year,
All right. Well,
because
we will certainly
these
keep
things.
our eyes peeled.
Oh, thank you,
And thank you so much for your time. Thank you, everybody, for
thank
joining us
you.
tonight. It's been very fascinating and it's been a privilege to speak to you.
Great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Bye.